Hey there, everybody. Welcome to ReadyTech. On this week's episode, we have Kenneth Jones, VP of Software Engineering from DAZN. Originally from South Africa, Kenneth moved to the UK over 10 years ago. Started his first role as a software engineer at the age of 14, left school with his parents' support, set up a business at 17, made his first hire at 17, and sold his organisation in 2011 and then moved to the UK. Since then, Kenneth has performed a number of roles at the Perform Group and now delivers impact through his role as VP of Engineering. In our chat, we talk about a bunch of stuff. We talk about company culture, high-performing teams, startups, the role of engineering in a product company. But without further ado, let's jump in. Tech is in almost everything that we do. It really truly is like a fabric of the culture that we live in. To you, what is technology?
It's such an interesting question, because if you really take it back to sort of its core, I kind of think of this as really anything to do with the betterment of the human species. For instance, early advancements in agriculture, things like crop rotation, that's technology. The buildings that we live in, going from mud huts to modern buildings, having a look at some of the modern medical science, all of this is technology. All of it is the betterment of the human species. If you have a look at people that are in poverty, often the way of bringing them out of that is with technology. When you look at traditionally more well-off people versus those that are living out in sort of rural environments in third world countries, often the difference between those two things is technology. Mm-hmm. I'm not just talking about things like phones and all the rest of that. I'm talking about living environments and the ways that people are able to take care of their bodies and all of that kind of stuff. In a somewhat purist sense, I would say that technology is always the betterment of the species, because the stuff that isn't generally falls by the wayside.
It is all about leveraging modern advancements to better humankind. So to you, what do you think then we're doing well in the world right now with technology?
Well, I mean, a case in point at the moment, I would say is some of the medical science that's going on. I mean, with this COVID vaccine that's come out, the way that's been developed has been fascinating to follow. The new kinds of ways of detailing the way that they would put these things together, not just from an initial point of view, but then also to change it as this thing mutates, I think has been absolutely fascinating. Another one that is happening right now is having a look at some of these data-led decisions. If we're getting more into the kind of corporate space where is probably more focused on the kinds of tech that we're talking about. Gone are the days of what we refer to as listening to the hippo, which is the highest paid person's opinion. That person is not always right. In fact, in very common cases, they're not. So having some of that data, having all of the metrics behind the decisions that you're trying to make, I think that's really what some of the technical advantages are pushing. So there's a lot of these kind of current ways of working that are evolving in the tech space that I think really tech has enabled.
There's many companies now all over the world that are truly kind of leveraging data and seeing the power of data, whether that's to further delight the customer, whether that's to become more intelligent, to make more informed business decisions, informing the hippos as a particular example, or the business just to simply become more intelligent, to be more operationally efficient, drive profitability, maybe within data, or we talked about kind of what you think we're doing well in the world right now with kind of technology, but are there any other innovations that excite you?
Well, I mean, maybe going a little bit off topic again, but I guess, very recently, the Perseverance rover that's just landed in Mars, I was totally blown away by that. Seeing some of those live images come back of the Martian landscape, it just seemed so totally surreal and could have absolutely been Earth. It was an extraordinary thing to see. So I think some of that sort of space exploration type stuff as well as the SpaceX and some of that space travel that could potentially be coming in the relatively near future. I think that's amazing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary, the stuff that they're doing there.
The more I've kind of got to know you, it's been a really kind of interesting background. Somebody who left school at 14, started their business at 17, and there's a lot of people that are trying to start their own kind of businesses out there. I may add, you created a successful business and sold it in 2011. For a startup founder, perhaps who is not technically minded, what would your advice be? Where would you focus first?
So I'd say that there's two areas that are really important. The first is to get good advice. If there is someone that you are aware of or have access to that has done similar things in the past, and has sort of cut their teeth on building up an organization, get some of their advice, especially if you have a tech-focused product in mind. Really having a look at that sooner than later is very important. And then second to that, in somewhat of a contrary opinion, is focus on your culture. A lot of what happens in technology can be replicated relatively easily. What you really can't do very easily is change culture. So if you have it in there to begin with, if you have great culture there, if you have fantastic collaboration between the people in your organization, then that is such a crucial starting point, and absolutely possible to change culture down the line, but it is not easy. And the bigger the organization, the more difficult it becomes. So having that stuff right in the beginning is crucial. And not only will it mean that you have a better functioning organization, it will also mean that you attract the right kind of talent coming into your fairly young organization. So I'd say that those are the two things that are really necessary. Good advice and focus on your culture.
Culture is something that's so talked about at the moment, and the importance, and you see the kind of cliche terms, culture eats strategy for breakfast being one of them. What is culture? What is a good culture?
It sounds a little bit lame and cop-outy. I would absolutely say that fun and joy and those kinds of emotive words are really what you're trying to go for. People want to enjoy the kinds of work that they go off and do. And if you have a bit of a stale environment, if it's a bit dry and a bit tedious to go in and do every day, then A, people aren't going to be particularly well engaged, and B, they will probably leave fairly quickly. So having that joy, having that vision, having that camaraderie with the people that you work with, that's what it's all about. And fostering that collaboration is crucial. And I would say that collaboration is probably the most important thing that you have. However, when you boil it down, that's where that collaboration comes from, is that fun and joy and enjoyment of what it is that you do.
You talked about hiring and attracting talent. So kind of if you're starting from scratch in your own environment, own business, like what would your first hire be?
I'm assuming that we're talking about a tech-focused organization, and correct, that all of your sort of business and culture stuff is in place. First off I think it's crucial to have an architect. I think it's crucial to have someone in there that understands the overarching view of what it is that you're trying to create. And the reason for that is not just so that you have an absolute expert in their field who can map this thing out for you. That is, of course, a huge benefit. But if you have a look at things like Conway's Law, which says that really the systems that come out of your organization are going to reflect the same kinds of boundaries as what you have within your organization, then knowing how your software, how your product, how whatever it is that you're trying to create needs to be structured, very often can and should dictate the way that you put teams together. Now, later on in life, in the business's life, that can flip. So you can say, all right, what does our organization look like? And therefore we should model our software over it. But you need a starting point. So I would say that in the beginning, that's the kind of place that you need to be. And then next up is just a fantastic engineering manager. So this is the person who's going to be working closest with the engineers that you have. I'm presuming that this is going to be an internally led software house as an example, but having that person who is going to put the work in for hiring the right kind of people, and then retaining those people, of course, with your own guidance and things like that, is crucial. And I would say that that's probably the most important hire that you can have is that initial interface with the people that are going to be coming in and really building the backbone of your organization, that product.
You mentioned a reference to Conway's Law. I've talked about a number of times within a number of teams because I think it's a very worthy reference. So as a leader yourself of a number of engineers internationally, and as Vice President of Engineering at DAZN, what do you feel your purpose is?
It's such a good question, and it's often such a difficult one to answer because there's so many hats that have to be worn. But I'll try and put it out there a little bit. There was a time when I was somewhat foolish enough to think that I had probably the best answers in a technology environment. I was in it. I was doing it every day. Engineering, doing all that kind of stuff. And those days have certainly passed me by. I am much more interested in the people side of things and putting organizations together. So I don't have the best core technology advice anymore. And therefore, I would say that my biggest skills in sort of leading people forward is that facilitation stuff. It's identifying the people that do have all of that hugely impressive knowledge, bringing them together, having the right kinds of conversations in order to get to the right decisions. And in that, you have to have that data-led approach as well. So fostering that, getting that into the workplace, and then also, fostering that culture of improvement in a very blame-free environment, because there's nothing that stifles innovation and improvement more than when someone tries something out and they get raked over the coals for it. So it really is one of those places where you have to ensure that people feel comfortable breaking out of the box that they are in order to provide some of those improvements and innovation. So I'd say there's a lot of building that culture, getting the right people in the room, and really sort of leading forward. That is my main focus.
Wow, you've actually so many questions off the back of what you've just said, from vulnerability to people to innovation. So I'm going to start with vulnerability. Some great references to the power of vulnerability, especially in leadership. I'm going to start by asking a question where I'm going to require you to be a little bit vulnerable. Do you look back on and see as your maybe highest technical project, product, experience that you classify as a failure?
In the Perform days, we owned we in fact bought a website called goal.com, which at the time, and I believe it still is, the largest football site in the world. And it was running on some sort of fairly standard technology. It was on a lamp stack, and there wasn't very much that was sort of difficult or complex about it. It was essentially just an enormous and very well used blog. One of the things that the organization decided it wanted to do was that we had an internal system for building websites, and that was run on a Java backend. And really any kind of customization that the engineers had to build these sites was using a templating language called FreeMarker. And it was somewhat painful, to say the least, because you really can't hire for those kinds of skills. And then to teach people that, it's not very transferable. So it was a difficult space to be in. And one of the things that they wanted to do was move Goal over from this fairly generic and honestly not terribly interesting technology stack into this in-house proprietary one. And it kind of took I'd say we were sensible enough to call it early, which is probably one of the learnings that needs to come out of it. But I would say probably it was around 3-4 months in where just every technical blocker that came up did come up and really just short-circuited the whole thing, to the point where we then needed to stop, reassess what it was that we were doing, and try a different tack. And I think off the back of that, there's a few things to take into account. One is to cut your losses when you need to. There's that fallacy that of invested time. If you have put X amount of hours, resources, whatever it is, into a project, then you are significantly more reluctant to stop it than you are to begin it in the first place. And that can often be very detrimental because you just keep throwing money into a pot that isn't going to be going anyway. So I'd say that's essential is to cut your losses when you see that something isn't going to be working out. But by far and away, the biggest thing that needs to be learned about this is you can't start with the kind of boundaries that are in place right at the beginning of a product. You can't say, all right, this thing that has been running in a pretty open system now needs to go into this extraordinarily closed off system because of reasons. What you really should be looking at is saying, what are the requirements around this? What is it that we are trying to achieve by doing this? And then saying, right, what is the best technological solution to this problem? What is it that needs to be done in order to have the best chance of success and to have the best technological outcome? And that's where we got eventually, thankfully. We sort of called that to a halt. We said, right, what is it that we're trying to do? Let's all agree that potentially this in-house proprietary thing that has been built is not fit for purpose for what it is that we're trying to do here. So let's put together a new platform. Let's put together a new way of building up these websites and things like that, so that we have a frictionless way forward. And that's where we got to. But certainly at the time, it was not a fun operation, and for quite a long time, it felt like running into a brick wall. But thankfully, we got there in the end.
You mentioned the word kind of in-house. I think you mentioned it about teams and maybe about bringing that kind of IP as well, whether that's been a third party that's been building that kind of for you. And you often see at times businesses either through a strategic choice or perhaps sometimes for convenience, looking to kind of externalize certain things. How do you decide when is the right time, or perhaps to ask that question, internal kind of versus external?
Sure. So I mean, it's an incredibly complex question, and depends on a lot of different factors. So the first one is the complexity. So is what you're trying to build a very specialized, complex system that would really only relate to your own organization? Would it only be out there because of the kind of technology that you're trying to put together? If that's the case, it's probably a good idea to get that built in-house with your own people, your own requirements, and you will then have the people to take it forward and support it. If there's already something out there in the market that does 90% of what it is that you're trying to look at doing, if you want to test things quickly, then it very well may make sense to go out there and get a SaaS, software as a service kind of a solution, or get an agency of some sort to put something together for you using somewhat readily available technologies. If there's something already out there that gives you most of what you're looking for, by all means go and do that. You can always change directions at a later stage. Is it foundational? Is this something that really is setting up the organization to move forward. If that's the case, again, you probably want to have all of this built internally. Now, again, a lot of this is dependent on the fact that you have teams to do this and to support it. I'm a huge proponent of ensuring that the teams that build software own it and support it moving forward. So, if you don't have the teams to build it to begin with, or if you have the teams but they are too overloaded with other stuff to be able to support it moving forward, then you probably, if it's time critical and you need to get something out there, have a look at other options, have a look at getting it out there and getting a third party to build something for you. Again, you can always in-house this later. I would strongly suggest that people that do take that route understand that that's a kind of technical debt. And, we can talk about technical debt and what that means at some stage, if that's something that you think is relevant. But you really have to go into that kind of a situation knowing that down the road, you're going to have to put time, effort, and people into getting that back in-house and getting it into a state where you can support it within your organization, if that's the strategy that you're going for. If you just want to say, yeah, I'm going to outsource all of the stuff and that's what it's going to be like ad infinitum, fine. That's a conscious decision that you're making. But you need to make sure that you're always looking at what the ramifications are of these decisions.
You touched on a few things when we talked about the vulnerability kind of side of things around when teams or organizations should perhaps kind of make the decision to sunset something. And one of the most things that we see at the moment is kind of engineering, whether it's now being still kind of very output led, very executional versus kind of outcome. And you've talked about kind of product a few times. You mentioned it just in the previous answer. As we start to try and look, organizations move towards being more kind of outcome led, value led, trying to deliver more value to both the customer and obviously the organization, is that engineering takes a different tact, which is embedding itself and serving the organization to help deliver more value to customers. So for you, from an engineering perspective, like how does engineering interact with product?
Extraordinarily closely. So I think that's one of the core things that we are seeing somewhat recently. And that is that if you have an organization where the people that have the vision for the product and are really sort of scoping out the requirements and things like that, if they are significantly far away or even just kind of in a different department, again, we're looking at this Conway's Law stuff, to the technology organization, then you start to get these disconnects. And you can break it down a bit. So you can get to a point where the product and engineering organization see themselves as one team. So, in a traditional sort of Scrum environment, a product owner and a development team see themselves as one team and work and collaborate together. That's possible. It's significantly easier if they are just in the same kind of organization to begin with, because there has to be that alignment. There really has to be a collaboration between those two sort of facilities as soon in the process as is possible. So what I kind of see this as boiling down to is in that sort of ideation phase, in that first instance where things are being dreamt up, it's the product people that are saying what is needed. It's the outcome-led stuff that you were talking about. They say, this is where we want to be getting to. It's the technology side of things that is saying how and when. The when is obviously to an extent, because if there's things like driving deadlines and all the rest of it, then there has to be a conversation about what can get delivered in that kind of time. But right at the beginning, it's the how are we going to provide you with what it is that you're trying to achieve, and when it could feasibly be provided to you.
I want to just live here for a little bit, just in this kind of product space, because it's such a topical point right now, and I'm seeing it with a number of conversations that either part of or people we know that are a part of. And if you was to put your shoes on the feet of the VP of product, kind of perhaps, and you was to look toward engineering, what would you be saying to kind of that VP of engineering to say, okay, well, how do I best leverage my engineering function?
Well, just asking that question is a fantastic starting point. So having that open dialogue between the leaders of those two organizations is a fantastic place to begin with. You really do need to have that collaboration. You really do need to be working together. So it's a don't be seen as a them and an us. It's a we. What is it that you're thinking of building? And let's have a conversation about how to best get there. Really, engineering inside of a product org is there to deliver on the vision of the product people. So that's what they're there for. They come up with these amazing ideas and these requirements that are going to fulfill the needs of the customers that we have. They have all of the knowledge of what we need to be delivering. We have to tell them how that's going to happen. We have to tell them what the best way forward is in order to achieve that. In addition to that, if I was the sort of VP of product in this scenario, I would be leveraging those tech people for as much data around my product as I could possibly get. Because again, coming back to this data-driven decision making, that's a crucial part of business at the moment. It really is ensuring that it's just not someone sticking their finger in the air and saying, yeah, all right, I think this is the way that we need to be going. We really need to test and learn in the product space to be able to have the right kinds of information to make the decisions on which way the product needs to be going. And then it's sort of providing guidance for things like monitoring and improvements on the base product. If product is saying, right, we absolutely have to be moving in this direction, but the house is on fire, then we have to be saying, look, granted, we will get there, but we're going to have to deal with some of the current issues at hand. Otherwise, we're going to get down to the road and everything will be up in smoke. So it's providing that kind of clarity between the two organizations, and ideally don't have the two organizations, have one organization that is product and engineering.
One of the key things there is, certainly from a product viewpoint, is that data-driven decision making. Is that whatever it is that you're building is and why you're building it. I think we want to emphasize on the word why here. What is the vision? What is the value? What is the customer proposition that you're trying to solve? And how can you measure along that journey that you're achieving towards delivering that value? And I think that's so critical, and understanding and getting that data, be it from monitoring, from user research, from whatever. I think data in our decision making is absolutely critical to stop you going down that process that you mentioned earlier, which is, you keep building something for a sustained period of time, and what you're doing is potentially burning through a lot of cash. Let's move back into kind of the engineering piece, but I still want to keep an emphasis on product. Now, when you're setting up an engineering function within an organization that perhaps is product thinking or is a product kind of company, what to you is best practice kind of engineering?
There really is no real answer here. It depends on so many factors. You've got things like monoliths that you could build out. There's microservices. There's new interesting ways of doing things called mesh. The only thing that you really have to do is do this test and adapt stuff. So ensuring that you are doing, I've had this mantra for years and years and years. Ensure that you are making small, measurable changes. So the first thing to do is to start, because far too many people get hung up on, is this exactly the right way to be doing things? Have I got this perfect in order to begin? You just get stuck in paralysis by analysis, and you really don't want to be there. What you want to do is you want to start, you want to test it, you want to iterate, and you want to adapt on what the results are out of that. That's the only thing that you have to do. Outside of that, continuous deployment, what sort of version controls you've got in, all of that is very dependent on what it is that you do. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, to a very large extent, you can't have continuous deployment because you have to ensure that certain things are in place before you can get it out there into the world. All of these best practices that are thrown around all over the place, in some cases, are completely irrelevant to what it is that you're trying to do. And so don't focus on that stuff. Have a look at what it is in your organization that is relevant, that is going to push your organization forward. And then, as I've said about 17 times, test it, adapt to it, and improve it.
And when you're talking about test it, as a particular example, before you start, are you talking about looking at things, the behavioral driven development side, the test driven development side? Do you think that is always, regardless of your approach? You mentioned microservices, mesh, other things like that, but there's maybe some core principles. Perhaps the key here is around practice and principles. Is there just some that you would never walk away from? Things like behavioral driven development, test driven development up front, so testing to the left?
Testing to the left is a great way of moving forward. Understanding what it is that you're going to be testing essentially is a great way to drive the development of that thing, because you know that your tests are going to work because you're building for those tests. Again, that is just one of the methods of building this stuff up. When I talk about testing in this scenario, is I'm saying that whenever you make a decision, whenever you start to say, all right, this is a way that we're going to work, let's say that we're going to implement test-driven development, then what we need to do is we need to understand what it is that we think this is going to improve. Is this going to mean that we develop faster? Does this mean that the outcomes of it are going to be significantly more stable? What is it that we think that this is going to improve? And then set those metrics. Say, all right, this is our baseline. This is where we are currently. And this relates back to the data that we have and are tracking. Implement the change and see what happens to that output. If it is improving, fantastic. If it's starting to take a nosedive, then you need to have a look at either implementing something different or stepping back. But that's why you want those small incremental steps, because it's easy to take a small step back. If you go in and put in just an enormous development process around absolutely everything, then backing out of that becomes a much more difficult prospect. So having those small, iterative, measurable improvements is what you're looking for.
Two things that you mentioned as part of the vulnerability question earlier, which is around people and innovation. So I'm going to start specifically now with people and more specific teams. When you're looking at your engineering organization in today's world, perhaps a more product-led kind of organization, and you've got your pen in front of you and you're thinking about drawing out, designing your kind of engineering team, could you give us through words, a visualization of how that team, that engineering team that you will design, what it looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say if you're in the beginning stages, and then similarly to a previous answer, I would say that you design them based on the systems that you're trying to create. So again, following that Conway's law adage, and really going in and ensuring that the boundaries that you're setting up from an organizational point of view are acceptable boundaries that you will see in the end product. So I'd say that's really fairly critical in the beginning. Later on, you can get significantly more fluid, and you can just kind of see where systems fit. find commonality in it in order to say, all right, this team is going to look after these systems, and what sorts of people do we need to have in there? And then on top of that, I really like to ensure that the people that are working for me, the engineers that are on the ground, have a significant impact on their own fate. They can go in and decide what it is that they want to be doing. When we're having a look at a restructure, or there's a large new plan for some sort of development, whatever it is, we can go to all of the engineers, break down what the bits and pieces are that we're trying to create, and then let people decide what it is that they want to be working on, where it is that they think that they will provide most value in, and let them self-organize as much as possible. In some cases, you can't do that. In some cases, it's just too rigid. There's something that comes in and you need this person to be working on that thing. You're never going to get around that. Sometimes that's the way it works. As often as you possibly can, allow people to dictate where it is that they want to be.
Having that trust, giving them full kind of accountability is definitely, and it's going to come on to my next question about kind of how do we set teams up for success. But before we kind of do that, just maybe a bit more kind of specifically kind of then within that, regardless of maybe whatever the thing that they were building, what is the first role for you that is absolutely critical in that kind of team design? You mentioned earlier about getting in an architect and then kind of a tech lead and then being kind of hand in glove with kind of one another. But to allow that team to first get off the ground and get building, is it your tech lead getting that person straight into the team first as you then start building around that person, or is perhaps there another person that we haven't mentioned yet?
I think everyone in those teams are equally important, to be honest with you. I would suggest that an architect is somewhat controversially is probably outside of that team a bit. Certainly they should be working together in order to figure out what the outcomes are. But on a day-to-day basis, it's unlikely that architects are going to be that involved in the team's work. Mm-hmm. Inside of the team, you really do need a well-rounded organization. You really do need to make sure that all of the kinds of skills in there are present. Now, whether you have testers as a sole function, or if you just have engineers that do their own testing, both of those are viable solutions depending on who it is that you have in the organization. My point is that there's no one that you need to have first. If you have an engineer that's coming into it, if you're starting from scratch and you have an engineer that can start, let them go off, let them build some stuff. So get to a place where you're actually producing software. If you've only got a QA person to begin with, let them start writing the automated tests so that when you then do have an engineer that comes along, they can hit the ground running. It really is start. Make sure you're doing something with the people and with the resources that you currently have. Far too often, people get hung up with that, but I don't have this person yet, and I don't have that person yet, so I can't do anything. It's counterproductive. Start on what you have, and there's no one that is more important in that team than anyone else.
We hear a lot of the things now within teams is phrases like psychological safety, empowerment, allowing the teams who are deep enough into the problem. You mentioned earlier is kind of, you're not deep enough at the core to make kind of the specific technical or technology related kind of decisions, so that allowing the team who are much deeper in that problem to solve it kind of themselves, but surrounding and wrapping that team design, as we kind of talked about, and kind of setting them up for success. Are there any key fundamentals that you would kind of never walk away from and perhaps take into each team or each organization, each culture that you build, where it's the formula that you use is always something which you would implement into any team in order to set them up for success?
Ownership is crucial. I think whenever you start to have these systems in place where one team builds it, another one supports it, a third one actually deploys it in between that. You've got these devolved responsibilities, and it never really works out, or at least sort of scattered responsibilities. I would say one of the crucial things that you need to ensure from the beginning is that the teams themselves own their services. So it's you build it, you ship it, you own it. Everything to do with this system is yours, and you need to ensure that it is running as efficiently as it can be. Once you've got that in place, you absolutely have to provide them with all of the information that you can on the health of the system, but also the health of the team. So if you are if you're looking at some sort of a service, then unless the team knows how well that service is performing, they can't react to problems. You may have a team that is essentially ignoring one of their systems because they think that it's running perfectly fine. If you're able to surface that up and say, here are all of the graphs and things like that you need to be paying attention to, and there's some alerts that are popping up that this is causing a problem and that's causing a problem, then because they own that system, they can go in and they can change it. They can fix the problems that are there. If you don't have that kind of monitoring in place, if you don't have those metrics in place, you're not going to have that. And then in addition to that, being very transparent with the team in terms of the health of that of that team, ensuring that there's the right sort of backlogs in place, and is the morale of the team high enough. All of those kinds of things that you need to be checking on team health. Surface that as well. Ensure that people see that. Because again, if there's a problem in it, it's that team that is best poised to be able to try and fix it. And then finally, if we're looking at some of the individuals, I subscribe to the sort of Daniel Pink methodology of motivating people in teams. And that is to ensure that you give them a vision, you provide them with the autonomy in order to fulfill that vision, and you give them the opportunity to master their craft. So give them a way that they can improve their skills. So I think if you have those three things and you're feeding that into the team, that's 90% of the battle won.
You've put all of those formulas in place, and the team have been adopting those things, like you mentioned, subscribing to kind of Daniel Pink there. If you was to look back or on a team that perhaps have been working together for a certain period of time, and you was to kind of label that team a high-performing engineering team, what to you, and we hear this phrase a lot, high-performing, high bar. What does that team look like?
Very simply, they deliver. A high-performing team gets software out there quickly, efficiently, and to the right standard of quality. So that's a fairly quick answer. Again, going back to what I was just talking about, they have to take ownership of their systems. Without that, I don't think that you're a high-performing team. They have to be data-driven. They have to be looking at the metrics. Without that, I don't think that you're high-performing, because there's a lot of things that can sort of slip under the radar. They drive improvements. Any team that is just sort of throwing out what is put into them, again, I don't think is highly performing, because they aren't bettering what it is that their own systems. So they have to be driving improvement. And then, from a more internal point of view, I want to see that they are developing each other. They are working with each other. They are bringing each other up as much as humanly possible. So they work on problems together. There's a lot of collaboration. And if someone is struggling, then they lift them up. They work with them. They teach them. I want to see that there's a real bond between the people in that team. Now, that doesn't mean that they all have to be best mates and they all hang out after work together and all that kind of stuff. It's great if they do, but that's not essential. What you have to have in there is that respect for each other. So they have to be respectful of each other and they have to actually respect one another. And that only comes from working together, from showing each other that they are all capable. And when someone falls down, lifting them up, because there's nothing that grows respect more than getting a helping hand from someone.
One of the things within that as well, I think, from a team perspective, also is focus from kind of the business kind of aspect. Is there any ways or any advice that you have for teams that you kind of where they focus on, or maybe in your past, how do they kind of focus on solving both kind of the short term and long term problems?
You have to be listening to the team when it comes to this stuff. So if you have a long-term vision that you need to be working on, then that's a great thing to be doing. It's exactly what needs to be happening. It's that vision stuff that I spoke about previously. What you can't do is follow that while the house is on fire. Really, the only people that know if that is an issue is the team, because they've got the data, they've got the knowledge, they're working on it. Time and time again, I say to people, engineering managers, business owners, whomever it may be, listen to your teams. Listen to the engineers and what it is that they are telling you. Because believe me, overwhelmingly, what they want to do is work on the cool new stuff that's coming in. If they are telling you that what they need to do is focus on what we have already and optimize it and improve it, that's something you need to be listening to, because it's not self-serving, this stuff. It is self-serving because it means they're going to have an easier time down the road, but it's not immediately what they desperately want to be doing. It's what they're saying needs to be done. So I would say that that's a crucial part of it, is listening to the people that are closest to it.
Just bridging the gap now between kind of people and innovation. I've talked about focus there. And one of the things also is kind of around organization, because, majority of teams, I suppose, dependent on kind of their mindset, but innovation obviously is, and you can have many forms of innovation but innovation perhaps is considered where the sexier side of technology is. But things like business as usual, tackling things like technical debt, especially if the team have inherited a particular product or code base from elsewhere. How do you organize those kind of teams to be able to kind of focus on tackling those types of improvements? Because as you've mentioned earlier in one of the questions, is that it's not about having a team doing the engineering, a team doing the testing, a team doing the deployment. It's about a high performing team, obviously being, end to end accountable. But so one of those things also that's important is maybe tackling those kind of three things around debt, technical debt, business as usual, and kind of innovation. So how do you see teams organized to make sure that they're kind of working and tackling all those things independently?
You spoke about business as usual. BAU sucks. BAU is not anything that anyone wants to be working on. A, it's not fun. It's not interesting. It's cool. And B, it's generally a waste of time for the people that are doing it. It depends on how you're classifying this stuff, but more often than not, BAU is manual tasks that shouldn't be manual tasks. I would say first thing first, find all of that stuff, automate it, and be done with it. You want as little, in quotes, BAU work going into your engineering team as humanly possible, because it's not worth the money that you're paying them to work on that kind of stuff. You want them focused on the innovation, the improvements, as well as repaying some of the technical debt that you hopefully have gone into knowingly that you're taking that stuff on. That's the first point. Improvements are coming through from what's fed to them, frankly. If we're talking about feature improvements or product improvements specifically, then that comes through from people like product and the collaboration that they've had with them in order to push that forward. If we're talking about internal systems, again, have them owning that. They're going to drive that forward in any case. If, again, the house is on fire, and those systems, those core technology systems that run underneath it need improving, then they're going to do everything in their power to improve them, because they don't want to be phoned out at 12 o'clock on a Sunday night because something's gone wrong. Again, putting that ownership in the hands of the engineers takes care of a lot of that sort of improvement that's in there. Finally, when we're talking about innovation, we've spoken already a bit about a blame-free culture, but really you need to provide the space and opportunity for that innovation. If you have things like error budgets, which I strongly suggest that everyone does do, have these SLAs in place where you say, all right, there is a certain amount of time that we acknowledge that these systems will be down. Allow people to play in that space. Allow people to say, all right, let's try and put a certain feature out to X number of our users, see if that works. Allow teams to do what they think is fun and interesting and cool and all those other kinds of buzzwords. Let them get it out there into the world, because that's going to not only provide huge amounts of value to the organization in terms of new features and things like that goes out there, but you're also going to retain your talent like nothing else. Allowing people to do that kind of work, and not just allowing, but encouraging it. That's how you keep the best people. Absolutely.
A number of questions that come off the back of that answer, but I try and keep it focused on one of the things you talked about. Yes, and business as usual is boring as hell, for sure. One of the things from an innovation point of view and keeping that mindset, we've made a couple of references in our conversation. I'm going to make a reference to a book that I constantly talk about and have referenced for many years is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And within that book, they talk about productive paranoia. And in a positive sense, which is, if something's going well, why is it going well? If something's going wrong, why is it going wrong? And it kind of starts to look at this innovation kind of mindset of these teams kind of trying to see around corners. And the danger sometimes is you can foster an innovation mindset, but you've got to add things like commerciality to that thinking. You've got to add things also from a business perspective, because you talked about talent there, and I'm coming to the question here is that, you could also lose your best and brightest if you foster an innovation mindset, but those ideas never perhaps come to fruition because the business isn't accepting of them, or perhaps the operating model that has been designed within the organization doesn't allow those ideas to flourish. I think that can be a real disease within an organization, but focus specifically on the mindset. How do you keep that mindset? You talked about space, but are there any other things to kind of keep that mindset within the team, either from a cultural or behavioral perspective within that team to foster that mindset?
You touched on a few areas that will certainly feature in this answer. I think that there's three areas to making this viable. The first is that you have to allow an innovation mindset. So that really comes in this blame-free culture. That's saying that if you are going to go out on a limb, you're going to try something different, and if it doesn't work for whatever reason, you're not going to get put on the rack for it. This is something that we are conscious that it's a decision that we're consciously making, that we want to allow this innovation. We want it to move forward. The next is to acknowledge it. This is as you were saying, if you put stuff out there and then just don't acknowledge it, if you don't say anything about it, then that can be extraordinarily disheartening. So you want to celebrate that. People really do need recognition. It sounds like a bit of a shallow thing, but it really isn't. People need to know that what it is that they're doing has real kind of value and is appreciated. So ensure that is being celebrated. Get it out there, acknowledge it, shout it from the treetops. If you have town halls and things like that, and I suggest you do, call it out there. make sure that the organization as a whole knows what your teams are doing from an innovation point of view. It's hugely important. And then finally, foster it. So have things like hackathons. And I don't just mean getting some engineering teams together saying, this is the kind of problem that we want to solve, off you go and do it. Really make an event out of it. Get some of your real senior, if you can possibly do that, some of the C-suites involved, and say, right, what is it that is crucial to our organization at the moment? Put it out to the engineering teams and say, go wild. And then let them do that over a period of time, dedicated specifically to this innovation and hacking something together. Then have it judged, have all of this recorded in some sort of a ceremony or something along those lines, an event where people come together for this. And again, put it out there, publish it, talk about it. We've recently done something similar in DAZN with a hackathon, and we've stuck videos onto LinkedIn, and the top ideas and the top sort of hacks that were put together are now in product backlogs. So they're things that are going to be worked on. And when teams see that their ideas that they really have had somewhat in isolation, without the involvement of product and operations and whomever else, when they see their ideas that they've come up with going into the final product, it's hugely gratifying. And that doesn't just need to be hackathons. So there can be design sprints or just sort of collaboration between product and tech teams. But the point is to try and formalize it, to try and say that this is something that we are actively pursuing. Let's do this all together, and so that people know that this is something that's expected of them.
There's a couple of things there. Blame-free celebration. Wanted to share something, and as you were saying that, my mind went to a particular reference, and I apologize to any listeners, or maybe somebody that may correct me because I can't remember the company where this kind of originated from. But have you ever heard of the expression failure parties?
I have, yes. Yeah.
So it was. And I can't remember where it came from. I don't know whether it was my head's going to a software gaming company in LA, but I could be completely wrong. And one of the things that they did,
I'm drawing a blank on it too, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it was, and I've always, we talk about psychological safety, we talk about celebrating these things, and I think still subconsciously, consciously, there's always a fear of failure, and one of the things to breed that kind of innovation mindset is that these companies celebrated failure, and I found that kind of process and that behavior really, really fascinating, where I forget how many times it was, but their process, but it was almost that they had like a Kanban board or a calendar on the wall with like 16 or 20 squares. And every time anybody in the business used to come and write on the wall, and they'd write what their failure was. And then once that board was full, they basically all went out and had a party. And it kind of really fostered this whole experimentation culture, this whole way of look, because it was okay to fail, because it meant that if we were trying so many things every month, it meant that we were innovating, it meant that we were kind of trying stuff, and it got people to really kind of voice. And I think that celebration for me, that blame-free culture is incredibly important. And I think something like failure parties or hackathons or other things where you create a safe environment to allow people to kind of stretch their mind, be intellectually stimulated. Because I think your best and brightest will always create shadow systems or shadow companies outside of your own if you just don't allow them to kind of flex their mind or flex their mental muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's a wonderful idea. I like being able to go out and celebrate these failures, because it means that you've learned some stuff. What I would do, and it's a little bit of fun police, I guess, but at least as part of that party, I would suggest that there is a reflection. There is all right, this is where something went wrong. Let me share this. One of the things that we like to do fairly often is have people get up and talk at things like town halls or events, whatever it may be, about what some of their failures have been, so that everyone knows that we're perfectly happy talking about this stuff, even externally. there's a guy that I work with. I hope you won't mind me calling him out. Alex Hollerith, who's our SVP of resilience, and almost monthly he goes around and talks about some of the biggest impacts that we've had on incidents that we've had on our systems, and really talks about what went wrong and how we could improve things, and how to ensure that there is this sort of blameless culture around, because it's some of the top people going around talking about this stuff, and the impact from that has been significant, not just from a learnings point of view, but from a mentality point of view, to say, all right, cool, these are things that we shouldn't shy away from. And some of it's been huge. In the Perform days, we had Sky Sports with what are those sort of scrolling information bits at the bottom with completely wrong information. And at the time, everyone was running around like headless chickens to try and fix it. But now we can watch a video of these presenters being incredibly confused by what's going on and, laugh about it, but also understand what led to it and ensure that that's a place that we really don't want to be in going forward.
As a student, maybe thinking about kind of a career in technology specifically, are there any books, avenues, anything that you kind of might recommend for somebody that perhaps is thinking about choosing a career in technology? Any advice?
First off, my advice is to encourage it. I've thoroughly enjoyed, and I expect to continue to thoroughly enjoy my career in technology. So it's a great place to be. My advice is to just try it. Is to just get started, whether that's working on your own little side project or getting an internship at an organization, or whatever it is that you need to do in order to kind of dip your toe in the water to see if it's something that you're interested in. Do that. We live in a day and an age where starting on these kinds of things, getting into technology, finding resources to teach yourself, if you don't want to go a sort of formal education route, is so accessible and it's so available that to be able to go into it is not a monumental task in the slightest. And ask yourself if you've got the right kind of mindset. Are you a creator? Do you like the data? One thing that I do as an example is I'm somewhat obsessed with data. So even things like my monthly spend, I go in and I take all of the transactions and I categorize them, and I've built a little system around it so that I know exactly where money's coming in, where it's going out, what my spending is looking like, all of that kind of stuff, because I just sort of need to know what's going on with that data. It's sort of an intrinsic thing. If you've got that kind of a personality, if you've got the need to know what's happening with things, such a vague statement, but such an accurate one, that's when you know that things are going in that kind of direction. There's absolutely these sort of code boot camps, and I've hired people from them in the past, and they have almost always worked out. So there's no doubt that is a positive avenue. It's a more expensive one. There's no doubt about it, but it does pay dividends. So being in tech is generally a fairly well paid career choice. So if you're putting out 5-10 grand kind of thing in order to get that base education, and a lot of these boot camps will then work with you to find a job once you've completed. It really is not a bad investment to make in your future. But I would say that you probably want to be fairly certain that that's where you want to be going in your career before you do something like that. So that's why I say just sort of get in there, give it a try. There's countless resources online. If you want to pay for them, if you want to look at sort of cloud stuff, I would suggest a cloud guru is fantastic. It's something that we provide to a lot of our employees when they need to sort of get up to scratch. We give it to some of the senior guys that they can go in and learn all of this stuff and then disseminate the information to the rest of their their teammates. It's hugely interesting stuff. I would strongly suggest that. O'Reilly books are great if you're looking at specific technologies. Go in and have a look at that. There's such a wide range that they publish on that. It's difficult to sort of boil that down to one or two books. But if you're looking for core technical stuff, I'd say that that's very important. There's so many things in there. I mean, there's also Udemy, which I hesitate to recommend, because in with all of the sort of gems that you can find in there is a lot of rubbish. So you kind of need to be somewhat critical. There's one that I came across not too long ago that I'm afraid I can't remember the name of, but it was from a guy that ran one of these code boot camps in LA. I'm pretty sure it was one of the top selling sort of getting into web software type courses. But have a look at that kind of online courseware. It's a hell of a lot cheaper than going for the boot camp if you just want to be trying things out. And really, at the end of the day, do you love the tech? That's what you need to be answering. Is this something that you can see yourself doing day in and day out, moving forward into your career? Because if you're not that fussed by it, then I'd suggest do something else, because it can become all-encompassing.
If you do think of the reference to the chap you just mentioned in LA, let me know, and I'm going to put a lot of the links and references that we've made in the show notes, so people can refer to them should they wish to. If you now had the power through technology to solve one of the world's problems or opportunities, what would it be?
Energy. I'd say that that's somewhere that we really do have to be changing things. So we have all of this climate change stuff that's happening at the moment, which is affecting not just us, but the entire world that we live in. So all of the various animals and ecosystems and things like that are in there. It's a real problem. So I would say a way for us to harness more of these sort of natural sources of energy is crucial, and something that has to happen. And that has a major knock-on effect to the rest of the world. So many wars and things like that have been fought over some of these fossil fuels. As I've mentioned, the climate change is a significant portion of that. And then finally, it's just quality of life stuff. If you can provide households with clean, affordable energy, it's a bit of a game changer. It means that people can break out of their sort of status quo on how they are currently living. So I'd say that that's probably the thing that is immediately crucial that needs to be fixed. If I'm talking a little bit more sci-fi-ish, but not very much more, I'd say I'm really quite looking forward to the singularity. And I hope that happens in my lifetime, because that is essentially the transfer of your consciousness into a machine, at which point you essentially become immortal. I've never really liked the idea of death. It seems like you put in a lot of time and effort and knowledge into gaining all of these experiences, and then at the end of it, it seems like a bit of a waste. So I'd be perfectly happy if I could avoid that.
Kenneth, it's been an absolute pleasure. Appreciate you taking the time this morning.
As you say, it's been an absolute pleasure, Michael. Thank you. And I really do appreciate the invite.
Anytime. We truly appreciate you making space this morning and sharing all that you had to share. So thank you.